In the fall of 1558, Queen Mary I eventually acknowledged her half-sister Elizabeth as her rightful successor to the throne. However, the events that led to Elizabeth's ascension were a harrowing tale of betrayal, psychological warfare, treason, and cruelty. Mary made every effort to avoid naming Elizabeth as her heir until her last breath. Mary, during her entire reign, feared Elizabeth and was convinced that she was conspiring against her. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, who had successfully pushed Catherine of Aragon as queen aside, treated Mary terribly. Anne had instructed servants to punish her physically and mentally whenever she claimed to be the legitimate princess. Mary's father, Henry VIII, was even worse than Anne. He would have probably executed her if she had refused to acknowledge him as the head of the church. He only allowed Mary one short visit to her mother within the last 5 years of Catherine's life. She couldn't even go to her funeral. Now, Elizabeth, who was the spawn of these two demons in Mary's life, was old enough to threaten her. The bitter irony is that Elizabeth was deathly scared of her half-sister Mary too. For as long as she could remember, Mary kept her distance or treated her outright horribly. Even though Elizabeth was Mary's heir by law, Mary never re-legitimized her. They were both daughters of Henry VIII, the man who had Elizabeth's mother executed when she was only 3 years old. Because of this, Elizabeth had to grow up without a loving and stable maternal figure in her life, and she learned she could trust no one early on. Elizabeth and Mary's fates were intertwined through their parents Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, and Anne Boleyn. The two half-sisters knew each other's weaknesses all too well, their mothers, and Mary was willing to use this knowledge to her advantage. Mary's reign began on a high note. She managed to oust Lady Jane Grey, who was named as the successor to her half-brother Edward VI in just 9 days. The people of London celebrated the start of her rule with great joy. An unknown resident of the Tower of London described the celebrations as follows: "I have never seen anything like it. Countless bonfires lit up the streets. People threw money out of their windows to share their joy. The bells were ringing and the people sang in the streets." All of this happened before Mary even entered the capital herself. She arrived on August 3rd, 1553. She was accompanied by Elizabeth, around 1,000 nobles, and 9,000 men of the guard. There were more soldiers on the streets to secure her way into the city. According to the Chronicle of the Greyfriars, every building was decorated to celebrate her arrival, and the people wore the finest clothes. While riding, Mary shouted her favorite quote from the Holy Book: "When God is with us, who can be against us?" This sentence was the core philosophy that Mary had started to structure her whole life around. The resident of the tower had noticed something small that marred the celebrations when the new queen and her companions arrived. The stage had been set up and some children were performing on it. One of them had given a short speech, but Mary had remained silent and did not respond to it. It became a recurring pattern that she struggled to comprehend the expectations of her subjects. Mary found herself in a difficult situation. She knew that a significant portion of the population were Protestants and were very unhappy about losing power. She was certain that a rebellion would start sooner or later. The person who could potentially figurehead such an uprising better than anyone else was Anne Boleyn's daughter Elizabeth. An additional problem was that Mary couldn't trust her government, as they had previously worked for her father, brother, and Jane. Therefore, she needed to find a new circle of trustworthy advisors. Mary likely realized at the beginning of her reign why her half-brother Edward had named Jane as his heir instead of Elizabeth. If Jane were to fail, another person would still be available to carry on. Mary couldn't touch Elizabeth as she was her successor by law. She also couldn't change the law as it had legitimized her queenship as well. She herself had just used it to push Jane aside. Mary tried to replace Elizabeth by favoring her longtime friend Margaret Douglas. This caused Elizabeth to lose her position as second in status, as reported by the French ambassador. Margaret was the daughter of Margaret Tudor and Archibald Douglas, and on the orders of Mary, she was given a room decorated with purple velvet and gold cloth, previously reserved for the sovereign of England. Mary also gifted her some lands that were originally owned by the crown. Margaret was a Catholic and a lifelong friend of Mary, making her a sound replacement for Elizabeth. Moreover, she was the heir presumptive of Henry VIII between 1536 and 1537, while Mary and Elizabeth were not part of the succession during that time, and Edward had not been born yet. According to Margaret's secretary Thomas Bishop, his employer seemed to have shared Mary's hatred for Elizabeth. In 1554, Margaret obtained chambers in Westminster located directly above Elizabeth's room. Bishop's report suggests that Margaret tormented the half-sister of the Queen by throwing wooden logs, pots, and other containers such as mugs to the ground, worsening Elizabeth's migraine attacks. Margaret denied these accusations, and no one, not even Elizabeth, confirmed their validity. If the accusations were true, it's hard to imagine she committed these acts without Mary's approval. The fear of being replaced and the torments Margaret inflicted on Elizabeth mirrored what Anne had to endure after Henry fell out of love with her. Mary's problems with Elizabeth got worse. Several powerful and influential men expressed an interest in marrying Elizabeth. However, Mary's advisors intervened each time, possibly under her orders. One example was Edward Courtenay, whose match with Mary's lady-in-waiting Jane Dormer was pushed by Bishop Stephen Gardiner to make it impossible for the Earl of Devonshire to marry the Queen's half-sister. If such a couple had produced an heir, their child, meaning the child of Elizabeth and Edward of Courtenay, would have been third in line for the crown. Additionally, the couple would have united significant resources. Mary became increasingly concerned about the idea of Elizabeth marrying an English noble, so she decided to take the official route to change the succession. It didn't even come to a vote. Elizabeth was very popular with the people, and Parliament rejected the wish of the Queen outright. This was almost without precedent. Normally, every monarch got the right to name his successor. The last time a king had to accept an heir he didn't want was when Henry VI had to confirm Richard of York. Mary's relationship with Parliament was strained, which was normal for a monarch, but not for Mary, who longed for appreciation and confirmation. And the Queen's fears regarding her half-sister seemed to manifest when Mary sought marriage to the Spanish Prince Philip, a staunch Catholic. Apart from Mary, nobody loved the idea, to put it mildly. Not even the groom were thrilled about it. He saw it as a political alliance and nothing more. One of his servants should write that he admired his master, cause Mary was nice to look at and couldn't give him any pleasure. A man named Thomas Wyatt opposed the marriage plans so strongly that he decided to take up arms against the Queen, and suddenly a match between Elizabeth and Courtenay became a real threat to Mary. Mary feared her half-sister would undo her Catholic restoration, and she had only one legal way to remove Elizabeth as her successor. If she had a legitimate child, he or she would inherit the crown. For this reason, she started to look for a husband. Philip wasn't the first idea. Two names were propounded prominently within England: Courtenay and Reginald Pole. The latter was a cardinal, which would have caused problems. However, the example of Cesare Borgia 50 years earlier demonstrated that they would have been surmountable. But Mary's cousin, Emperor Charles V, intervened. He wanted Mary to accept his only legitimate son, Philip, as her husband. The Queen was thrilled with the idea after seeing a portrait of Philip painted by Titian. The House of Commons and even Mary's own Lord Chancellor, Bishop Stephen Gardiner, protested and petitioned that Mary should seek a match with an Englishman. They feared that England would become just another part of the vast Habsburg Empire, which Philip and his possible sons with Mary would inherit one day. Mary and Philip had to accept the compromise that they both hated. Months later, Parliament passed the Act for the marriage of Queen Mary to Philip of Spain, which stated that the Habsburg heir would be treated as a co-monarch. He would enjoy all of Mary's titles and honors as long as she lived. Every official document would have to be dated with both of their names, and Parliament would be called under both of their names. Coins would be minted with both of their faces. However, England wouldn't be obliged to support Philip's father in any war, and Mary would still be the higher authority. Even though they co-reigned, and in private life Mary had to obey him as it was customary, she was still the ruling monarch. Mary took steps to dispel the notion that Philip would only be a king consort. She had laws passed in England and Ireland to make it high treason to deny Philip's royal authority. The marriage treaty was officially presented to the Queen's Privy Council on December 7, 1553. According to the Tower resident, the general public was not informed about the marriage plans until November. It is likely that Mary only announced her intention to marry Philip after she knew he would accept. Although Philip had been married before, the couple did not have any healthy children. Around the same time, Mary's spies reported that new visitors had started to visit Elizabeth's household in Hertfordshire. Elizabeth had left the court early after Mary's coronation on October 1st, 1553, in which she had played a ceremonial role alongside Anne of Cleves. Every one of Elizabeth's new guests despised the idea of the Spanish marriage and wanted to take action against it. Among these conspirators was Sir William Lowe, one of Elizabeth's servants, played a key role in the group. Lowe's family had previously supported Lady Jane Grey, who was still alive during this time. Therefore, the half-sister of the Queen very likely knew that something was going on. Elizabeth chose to stay out of the conspiracy and did not actively participate. Other key conspirators included the already mentioned Sir Thomas Wyatt, the younger from Kent, Edward Courtenay, and Henry Grey, the Duke of Suffolk, as well as Sir Peter Carey. While some describe Courtenay as the last living Plantagenet due to his great-grandfather being Edward IV, this is not entirely accurate, as members of the Pole family were still alive. Mary had ordered Courtenay's release from the Tower in 1553, therefore his involvement in the conspiracy must have been especially painful for the Queen. Wyatt was a skilled and charismatic soldier who was chosen to lead the rebels' main force, consisting of 3,000 men. The insurrectionists planned to replace Mary with Elizabeth and have her marry Courtenay to rule together and restore Protestantism. This was Mary's worst fear. Initially, the plan was to start 4 differing uprisings on March 18, 1554, to overwhelm the royal forces. Additionally, the French fleet was supposed to prevent Philip from reaching England. However, the date had to be moved up because the wedding preparations were progressing much faster than expected. The uprisings were scheduled to begin on January 25th, but they only happened at the Welsh border at first. Mary requested Elizabeth to come to London, but she refused, citing sickness. She was scared of being arrested. This fear was not baseless, as English monarchs had a track record of imprisoning those who could potentially challenge their rule. Mary's government responded by immediately sending forces to stop Wyatt, who had begun his military operation by now. To the Queen's horror, her soldiers defected to the rebel side as soon as they saw them. This created an open path to London. Mary's finest moment as Queen came on February 1st, when she walked to the Guildhall with her scepter and coronation ring. She climbed a flight of stairs to the stage and addressed the people directly. Mary promised not to marry Philip if Parliament voted against it, emphasizing that she was already married to England. She made a point of showing her coronation ring to demonstrate her commitment to ruling for the good of the people. It is worth noting that different versions of her speech were recorded, and for example, John Fox does not include her promise about the marriage. However, his account is based on a second-hand source. Whatever Mary's actual words were, they worked. Wyatt needed the support of the citizens of London, otherwise royal forces in such a number and sufficiently loyal to Mary would arrive soon enough to prevent him from fulfilling the plan. When he tried to enter the capital, the people started to fight him. And the guard in the city didn't just surrender. The main force of the rebellion crumbled to dust at the gates of London in February. The tables had turned, and Elizabeth was up to relive the trauma of her mother. Wyatt surrendered on February 8th and was immediately interrogated under torture. Even before he named Elizabeth, Mary had summoned her half-sister once again. But this time, the Queen was better prepared and sent her physicians with her envoys in case Elizabeth would feel too sick to travel again. The half-sister of the Queen once more refused to come to London, citing an illness. However, Mary's physicians ruled that although the illness was real, it wasn't severe enough to prevent her from coming to the capital. Elizabeth was then transferred to Ashridge House, located 30 minutes north of London, where her interrogations began. She was pale and dressed completely in white. Lord Howard, Sir Edward Hastings and Sir Thomas Cornwallis reported back to Mary on February 11th that the princess was willing to return to court and repair her relationship with the Queen, and only asked to be lodged further from the water than the last time. Elizabeth asserted her innocence concerning the insurrection. Mary was unable to deal with Elizabeth immediately due to a lack of time. The Queen finally permitted the execution of Lady Jane Grey, whom the rebels saw as a potential alternative to Elizabeth, just in case. Although London was under control, the rest of the country was still in disarray. On February 24th, Thomas Culpeper, an older half-brother of the one who had, let's say, an inappropriate relationship with his cousin Catherine Howard, reported to Mary that there were still insurrections occurring throughout England in opposition to her Spanish marriage. In response to this, the crown reacted harshly. Captured rebels were executed and their leaders were subjected to severe interrogations. One day after Culpeper's report, Mary's secretary John Bourne informed her that he had worked hard to make Sir Thomas White confess concerning the Lady Elizabeth and her servant Sir William Lowe. The accused confessed, implicating the Queen's half-sister and stating that Sir James Croft, one of the rebel leaders, had more information. Croft was one of the men who received a pardon later on and was treated favorably by Elizabeth during her reign. Mary ordered the arrest of her half-sister. She should be held in the Tower. The walls were closing in on the 20-year-old princess quickly. Elizabeth panicked and wrote to the Queen. The document, referred to as the Tide Letter, showcases Elizabeth's intelligence in multiple ways. On the second page of the letter, lines are drawn across the blank space above her signature to prevent the insertion of false information. Additionally, she wrote the letter deliberately slowly, ensuring that by the time it was completed, the evening low tide had passed and boats couldn't safely pass London Bridge. This bought her an extra day outside of the Tower. Thus, the document is called the Tide Letter. The last line of the letter, just above her signature, reads, "I humbly crave but only one word of answer from yourself." She never received it. The next day she was taken to the Tower, arriving at 10 o'clock in the morning. Although rumors circulated that she had entered the complex through Traitor's Gate, this was not true. Instead, she had used a drawbridge for entry, and upon arrival, some soldiers knelt in front of her. This means that she probably entered the Tower via the private postern gate, which is today's Byward Tower, just like her mother 17 days before her execution. She was brought into the very same lodgings Anne was held in. They were comfortable and matched her rank, but they were, without any question, psychological torturers all the same. Upon entering the Tower, the resident reported her words to the soldiers, saying, "Oh Lord, I never thought I would come here as a prisoner. I pray that you, my good friends and fellows, will bear witness that I come as no traitor, but as a faithful woman to Her Majesty the Queen. I am willing to take my death for this." Shortly after, she asked the Lord Chamberlain if all the armored soldiers would be present because of her, but he denied it. However, Elizabeth did not believe him and insisted that they were there for her. She also mentioned that there was no need for them, as she was nothing but a weak woman. After she was taken to the Queen's house, the Lord Chamberlain and the Lord Treasurer locked the doors tightly. They consulted with each other and with, quote, weeping eyes, decided to only follow the exact commission given to them, considering that Elizabeth was the daughter of a king and the sister of the Queen. John Gage served as the Lord Chamberlain and Constable of the Tower during Elizabeth's imprisonment. William Paulet, who had previously served as a judge in the trials of John Fisher, Thomas More, and Anne Boleyn, was appointed by Mary to deal with Elizabeth in the Tower. Despite Paulet's involvement in the trial of Elizabeth's mother, she had a good relationship with him. As a prisoner, Elizabeth had the privilege of going for walks, and she was able to talk to other prisoners. The road from the Bell Tower, which shares some rooms with the Queen's house, to Beauchamp Tower, which ran alongside the Royal Mint, became known as Elizabeth's Walk. Although it is unclear how much she knew about events outside of the Tower, she likely suspected that her life was in danger. Elizabeth was interrogated several times, and she complained bitterly about being forced to justify her movements from one of her houses to another. Her accusers had found a letter from rebels warning her to avoid London on the day of the insurrection, but they did not explain the reason. Elizabeth responded that she would comply with the warning. Mary initially wanted Elizabeth executed when she was imprisoned in the Tower. Gardiner and the imperial ambassador supported this view, arguing that Mary's rule could never be secure as long as Elizabeth was alive. However, Charles V intervened, concerned about Elizabeth's popularity, and advised Mary to gather proof before taking action. Mary, who considered Charles her, quote, real father, heeded his advice. She tasked her specialists to find evidence and/or extract it from the rebels through torture. Mary's propagandists also worked to undermine Elizabeth's popularity by connecting her to the rebellion. Elizabeth was interrogated again, and Mary's Lord Chancellor Gardiner personally got involved. As the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution neared, Elizabeth knew that whatever her fate would be, it would probably reveal itself on this day. She was right. On the morning of May 19th, the constable and his lieutenant awaited her, accompanied by guards. Around 70 years later, Peter Heylin, one of the future Charles I lecturers, would describe Gage as a bitter enemy of Elizabeth. Mary had made her decision. Let's continue this next week. And as usual, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.